A shocking fall from grace as P. Diddy now sits in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center up against some intense federal charges. But by all accounts, Diddy's planning to put up a fight in the way of a legal defense, and that's headed by New York defense attorney Marc Agnifilo. So who is Agnifilo? We'll take a deeper dive into his history and potential plans for his defense of Diddy. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. It's now been more than a week since 54-year-old Sean P. Diddy Combs has been behind bars, accused of multiple federal charges. Last week, a grand jury indicted Diddy, and he was charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy pleaded not guilty to these charges and requested bail twice, offering up $50 million for his release that would be co-signed by Diddy, his sister, his mom, his 3 adult sons, and the mothers of 2 of his children. On top of that, the defense also suggested Diddy would have major restrictions on travel, a GPS monitor, and even limitations on female visitors. But U.S. District Judge Andrew L. Carter gave that the red light and denied Diddy's release. Instead, he ruled Diddy will remain in custody as he awaits trial. Diddy's been placed at MDC in Brooklyn, one of the most notorious jails in the country. Diddy's team immediately pushed back, citing recent murders, suicide, and deplorable conditions at MDC. His legal team requests that Diddy be transferred to a different jail in New Jersey. And the point person behind that request and Diddy's team is defense attorney Marc Agnifilo. If that name is familiar to you, it may be because you've heard it before. He's repped several high-profile defendants, like the NXIVM cult leader Keith Raniere and Roger Ng, a former Goldman Sachs banker convicted of bribery and money laundering. We'll get to those cases in a second, but first, a bit about Agnifilo's history. He received a bachelor's degree in philosophy and political science from Connecticut College in 1986. In 1990, he received his Juris degree from Brooklyn Law School, and while there, even received the American Jurisprudence Award for Outstanding Performance in Trial Advocacy. Starting in 1998, Agnifilo began his work at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of New Jersey. There, he worked as the chief of Violent Crime Unit and specialized in cases involving murder, money laundering, extortion, and drug trafficking. During his tenure there, Agnifilo became a nationally recognized expert in sophisticated criminal prosecutions and the RICO statute, the very same statute that Diddy is now charged under. Agnifilo stayed with the U.S. Attorney's Office until 2006, when he began work at the law office of Benjamin Brafman, who, by the way, repped Diddy in his trial regarding the New York nightclub shooting. You may remember Diddy was charged with illegal weapons violations and bribery charges in that case after a shooting broke out near Times Square in 1999. No one was injured, and Diddy was ultimately acquitted of the charges. His former rapper Shine, however, was convicted and served multiple years in prison before being deported to his home country of Belize. But back to Agnifilo. According to his own resume, he writes, quote, "I handle high-stakes, complex criminal cases involving securities, mail, wire insurance and bankruptcy fraud, money laundering, construction and labor union matters, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA violations, racketeering and enterprise corruption, international arms dealing, antitrust, bribery, kickbacks, criminal tax investigations, espionage, Iran-sanctioned violations, and political corruption. I specialize in sensitive and high-profile matters, including United States congressional investigations." Agnifilo has multiple bar admissions, including the New York State Bar, State of New Jersey Bar, United States District Courts for the Southern and Eastern Districts of New York, the Supreme Court of the United States, and the United States Courts of Appeals for the Second Circuit. For the past several years, Agnifilo has been lead counsel for the Agnifilo Intrater law firm. That leads us to Agnifilo's notable cases, beginning with the federal trial of NXIVM cult leader Keith Raniere. He was arrested in March 2018 on federal charges of sex trafficking, conspiracy for sex trafficking, and conspiracy to commit forced labor. These charges stemmed from Raniere's role as the leader of NXIVM, a personal development company that offered things like self-help seminars. In reality, NXIVM was a cult with Raniere at the helm. Over the course of more than a decade, Raniere mentally, physically, and sexually assaulted NXIVM members, essentially creating sex slaves, many who branded themselves with a symbol consisting of his initials, KR. Raniere's federal trial began in May 2019 with Agnifilo as part of his representation. The next month, Raniere was found guilty on all charges and later sentenced to 120 years in prison. Agnifilo also defended Roger Ng, the one-time banker for Goldman Sachs who was convicted for his role in a massive money laundering scheme. Ng conspired to launder billions of dollars embezzled from the strategic development company One Malaysia Development Berhad. All this is often referred to as the 1MDB scandal that not only saw Ng embezzle, but pay more than $1.6 billion in bribes to government officials in Malaysia and Abu Dhabi. He was convicted and last March sentenced to 10 years in prison. All this brings us to Diddy's indictment. Agnifilo jumped on board to Diddy's team shortly before he was indicted on federal charges on September 16th. Since then, he's been somewhat outspoken, releasing a statement following Diddy's arrest that reads in part, quote, "Sean Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal." To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with the investigation. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in the court. In the trailer for an upcoming TMZ documentary, The Downfall of Diddy, The Indictment, Agnifilo said, quote, "I don't know that I could keep him off the stand. I think he is very eager to tell his story." Agnifilo also addressed Diddy's relationship with Cassie and the graphic video released this spring showing Diddy assaulting Cassie in a hotel hallway. Agnifilo said, quote, "I think he will tell every part of his story, including what you see on the video." He went on to say, quote, "He has his story, and he has a story that I think only he can tell in the way he can tell it in real time. And it's a human story. It's a story of love, it's a story of hurt, it's a story of heartbreak." When he describes that relationship, the one with Cassie, the word he uses more than any other word is heartbreak. He was heartbroken. She was heartbroken. Agnifilo also addressed the vast amount of baby oil and personal lubricants that federal investigators collected during the raids of Diddy's homes. He said, quote, "I don't think it was 1,000. I think it was a lot. I mean, there is a Costco right down the street. I think Americans buy in bulk, as we know." These allegations against P. Diddy are truly shocking, but the plaintiffs filing them seek justice for these alleged assaults. And if you're injured, you can do the same. I'm talking about our sponsor and proud partner of Law&Crime, Morgan & Morgan. They have an army of over 1,000 attorneys who will fight for what you deserve. Not to mention, they have a pretty impressive track record of wins under their belt. So if you're ever hurt or seriously injured, turn to Morgan & Morgan. Your case could be worth millions. Start a claim in 8 clicks or less at forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover. Less than 2 weeks removed from Diddy's arrest, we're sure to hear more from Agnifilo before the trial. But in the meantime, let's hear from Law&Crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman. Obviously, Diddy has been very outspoken, saying that he denies all of these allegations through a video, a couple of statements, and now that he's behind bars, his legal team has put out even more, saying he's not doing this and we're going to prove it in court. What do you think is the route that the defense is going to take as they're building up their case?
Well, I think they've showed some of the route they're going to take. I think Marc Agnifilo is incredibly effective. He's handled many high-profile cases. And, look, I think one of the things that he's saying, or at least should be saying, is, wait before anyone judges what the evidence is in this case. And I think the other thing he's suggesting, and I think should be suggesting, is, people keep comparing this case to R. Kelly, and quite frankly, I was during a period of time. They are distinctively different. R. Kelly's case involved minors, which I think is very different than the case we have with regards to Sean Combs. And one of the things Marc Agnifilo has focused in on is consent. He has, gone on national TV and said, these are allegations that involved consenting adults, very different than what you've seen in the R. Kelly case and cases in the past. And I think they're going to focus in on that. And I think they're going to learn every single thing they can, interview every single witness they possibly can that's willing to speak to them, see any inconsistencies, any lack of corroboration, anything that puts them in the best light going forward to trial.
Diddy has been very straightforward that he is ready to put up a fight. And he also has seemingly endless resources at his disposal, a very hefty bank account. So, do you think him choosing Marc Agnifilo to lead his legal defense was a good choice?
I mean, I think Marc Agnifilo is a fantastic defense attorney, and I respect him. You know, look, one might. He has females on the team. Some like to see a female as front and center because some, especially when someone's alleged to have committed sex crimes, they sometimes think, and it happened in the Harvey Weinstein case, that when the face is a female, it's potentially more effective. I'm not sure that that's correct or not. It really depends on every aspect of the case, including who the jury is and who the judge is and who the other players are. But I think he's an excellent choice for this case.
What do you think is going on with him as of right now? Because obviously we're still super early on. There's been no trial date that's set, but he's going to want to be super prepared when that does happen. Use all the time as his resource. So what would he be doing right now in the immediate future?
I mean, look, this is an incredible fall from grace for Sean Combs. He has, from all accounts, lived an incredible life of luxury, and some would say, or many would say, entitlement. And so now he is at MDC, which I can tell you for myself is probably the worst place to be in. And so, I think I'm confident, anyone in his predicament needed to take the time to realize they are where they are and then move forward in trying to make sure that they are helping their defense in the best way they can. Keep in mind, when someone's in jail, it is very difficult to help your defense. We have clients all the time that are incarcerated. It makes our job so much more difficult. So it's always easier for the defense when we have a client that's able to work with us, see the evidence instead of us having to go in through MDC, which, by the way, even getting to see someone takes hours before you even get in to talk to them. And so I'm confident that he is working as hard as he can, I assume, to make sure his defense has all the information they need to help them in terms of strategizing.
I think after Diddy's arrest, a lot of people are looking to his defense team and saying, who is this guy? What's his background? And obviously with Agnifilo, we oftentimes connect it to the case of Keith Raniere, who was the NXIVM cult leader. They're kind of comparing these two cases because Keith Raniere was also charged with racketeering, similar-ish charges. And in that case, he lost. I mean, he was sentenced to 120 years in prison. Is that any indication of what could happen to Diddy?
So, anytime we talk about the federal government, I think everyone has to recognize the federal government has an advantage that the state government doesn't. And in terms of their ability to try cases, their ability to access information, their ability to have evidence admitted during the trial is much more powerful than in any other state prosecution. And so anytime one goes to trial, they're up against quite a large obstacle. And, when we talk about the Raniere case, the case was overwhelming against him. That doesn't mean he had a weak defense attorney. Marc Agnifilo has been successful in many cases. He used to work for Ben Brafman, who, by the way, represented Sean Combs years before. And so I'm not sure that defines who he is. Obviously, if someone walked into a courtroom and saw him doing an ineffective cross-examination, then maybe we would change our mind. But I don't think the fact that he lost a case such as the one we're talking about right now has any indication that he's not fully capable of handling this case.
He's also been pretty outspoken talking to major news outlets, and most recently, he's discussed Diddy taking the stand. Apparently, Diddy himself wants to testify when it comes time to trial, and Agnifilo is saying, okay, we're going to tell our story. So that opens kind of a can of worms, putting your defendant on the stand. He's subject then to cross-examination. I mean, what would that look like?
So it's funny, Sarah, someone asked me recently, like, how I handle kind of the idea of publicity when you're dealing with a case. And everyone's different. My approach is to say less. I don't like to talk about a case publicly unless I know absolutely everything, because I'm always worried that something will come out that will kick me in the what. And so I tend to be very quiet about that. I also don't tend to talk about the idea of a client testifying Why? Because, granted, jurors aren't supposed to watch TV. They're not supposed to look up the case, but inevitably they don't always follow the rules. And if a juror expects my client to testify and then my client doesn't, they're going to hold it against them, whether they said they were or not. He may very well be planning to testify and will testify. But it's so early on, it's hard to imagine that anyone knows if he's going to. Now, if he does testify, the question becomes, well, what's that going to look like? And remember, this is federal court, so we don't get to watch. We just see the texts afterwards as to what the reporters got to see, but this is not live. And so we're never going to fully get a full breadth of what that cross-examination looked like. But I do sense that the prosecution will have a wide latitude in terms of the questions they're going to ask. And it'll be interesting to see how prepared Sean Combs is.
There are a couple of follow-ups I want to that because you brought up some pretty interesting things, but I wanted to start with the publicity. Obviously, this is a huge case. We've been kind of anticipating this for at least 6 months, if not longer. So Agnifilo knows he's got a high-profile celebrity case, and there's a lot of publications about it. So why do you think he would be so outspoken and willing to speak with other people, talk about the case, rather than keep quiet to himself?
So remember, it's not necessarily just Agnifilo's decision. I think, anytime you have a case, especially with a high profile client, that client is going to have some input on what they want happening too. And I'm sure there's a team of people making those decisions. And remember, Sean Combs, I know that the most important thing right now is this criminal case, secondary his civil cases, but also his image matters. And so when an image matters, you're going to put out the PR that you think will help him. You want the community, the world to say, you know what, maybe we're too quick to judge. Let's wait this out. Let's hear more before we make a decision. And that may very well be the reason that he's doing it.
You mentioned the world because honestly, all eyes globally are on Diddy and this case. And that leads into my next question. How difficult is it going to be to seat a jury? I mean, most people are going to at least know who Diddy is, if not have heard any of these allegations. It's almost like we can't escape the headlines. So how do you think that Agnifilo himself would kind of tackle that?
So, federal court and choosing jurors is much different than in state court. It's much more limited in terms of what the defense attorneys and the prosecution is allowed to ask the jurors. And remember, it's not required that a juror's never heard of Sean Combs, P. Diddy, Puff, like that. That's not required. What's required is that A, they don't read anything during the course of the trial, and B, that they haven't formed any opinions about the guilt or non-guilt of this individual, that they really come in with a completely clean slate. The difficulty is, when a juror comes in, are they telling you the truth? Some jurors want to sit because they think that it will make them famous. We've heard of jurors wanting to sit because they want to write a book 2 months later. And so it's so difficult to know really who your jurors are after meeting them for 10 minutes, a half hour, an hour. And so I think that navigating this is incredibly difficult, but the goal for both sides, and particularly for Sean Combs' side, is someone who's saying, you know what, I need to hear the evidence before I make any decisions about his guilt.
Law&Crime has reached out to Marc Agnifilo for an interview, but we have not yet heard back. We can expect to see him, though, on October 9th, when Diddy is due back in court. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.